That night, I went to sleep feeling like I no longer belonged in that house. But it was that morning, with the coffee still hot in my cup, that I heard the words that burned more than any drink. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're a nuisance. It's time to understand that you no longer belong here." My son-in-law. The man I've welcomed with affection since the first day he entered my daughter's life. I stood there, spoon in hand, my heart in pieces. My daughter, who had witnessed the whole thing, just lowered her eyes and continued scrolling through her phone, as if she hadn't heard anything. As if I myself had become invisible. It was at that moment that I realized I no longer had a voice in that house. But what came next was worse. At the end of the day, as I struggled down the stairs, balancing a bucket of laundry, I felt a slight, disguised push, almost like a bump. But I know the hatred in someone's eyes. And I saw, even if only for a split second, the look in his eyes when he saw me fall. And it wasn't of shock. It was of relief. I fell sideways, hitting my shoulder, hip, and head. I felt dizzy and had trouble walking for the next few days. And yet, they said I tripped on my own. That I'm old, that it's normal to fall. What they didn't know is that the garage camera was still active. This story isn't just about a fall. It's about how they tried to erase my existence. About how they made me believe I was a hindrance, that I didn't deserve respect, space, or love. And it's also about the twist that no one expected. Because when I saw that recording, something inside me woke up. The Helen who once sacrificed herself to raise children, to support the home, to always be available, gave way to another Helen. The one who no longer had anything to lose, and therefore had everything to gain. But before I tell you how I turned this game around, how I used that recording to show who I am, subscribe to the channel and comment here where you're watching from. I want to know if you've ever been through something like this. What comes after that is not revenge. It's justice. And when justice begins, no one can stop it. Now come back with me to a few days before that fall. Because there are things you need to understand to feel the weight of what happened afterwards. They don't call me Mom anymore. That slowly faded, like a wall losing paint until it becomes a shell. Today, inside that house, I'm just a noise. A body passing by. A presence no one notices, except when they need something. I'm 72 years old. I was married for almost 5 decades to the love of my life, Vicente. He left us 3 years ago, and with him, so much went. My home, my routine, even my laughter. When he got sick, we sold our little house to cover his treatment. After he passed, my daughter said to me, "Come live with us, Mom. You won't be alone here." And for a while I believed it. Their house was bigger, yes. It had space. I had a room just for me. But I soon realized that not all space is synonymous with welcome. That room became the only place I could exist in peace. And yet, even there sometimes they invaded. With looks. With snide comments. In the morning, I always woke up before everyone else. I made coffee, tidied the kitchen, set the table. It was a ritual, not because anyone asked me to, but because it was what I knew how to do. It made me feel useful, alive. I cared for my grandchildren as if they were an extension of me. I prepared their school snacks, fetched clean uniforms from the laundry room at the reception desk, and sorted their test notebooks. They, at least, smiled at me. They hadn't learned to ignore me yet. But my daughter, she had already learned. Before, she'd call me to the couch, ask me about the past, ask for advice. Now, she barely looked up. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Turned into, "Can you make dinner?" Or "Did you see where my charger is?" Affection turned to usefulness. And Douglas, he never saw me as family. From the beginning, I could feel it. But I kept quiet. For her sake. For the peace of the house. For the old idea that it's better to avoid trouble. But confusion, when it wants to, settles in silence. Deep down, I was trying to understand. Where did I get lost in this whole thing? At what point did I stop being the woman who held down 2 jobs, who cared for her mother with Alzheimer's, who raised 3 children with dignity, and become this burden no one wants to carry. I think it was an attempt to help too much, to give myself without measure. We grow up believing that love is renunciation, that caring is silence, that being good is endurance. But no one tells us that when you give up, people get used to your silence. I remember sitting on the couch, holding a photo of Vicente. It was a Sunday. Outside, the kids were playing, and inside, no one saw me. And yet, I made lunch. Rice, beans, oven-roasted chicken. Cooking has always been my way of showing affection, even without receiving it. I put the food on the table and called everyone over. They sat down, ate, talked about their week, and laughed at videos on their phones. No, thank you. No, it was good, Grandma. That afternoon, when I went to put away the dishes, I heard Douglas say to my daughter, "She needs to understand that this is not her home." I paused, the cloth still wet in my hand. I took a deep breath. And then I realized, it wasn't just about physical space. It was about identity. About being slowly erased, as if I were just a detail on the fringes of their lives. That night, while organizing the toys in the living room, I accidentally knocked over a toy car, which made a noise on the floor. He looked at me irritably. He didn't say anything. But his eyes screamed. And that's when I started paying attention to the details. The silences. The exchanged glances. The interrupted sentences when I entered the room. That house had become an emotional minefield. But there was one thing they forgot. When I sold my house and moved here, I asked to install a security camera in the garage. It was a simple request. For fear of robberies, I said. But it was more than that. It was an invisible need to have a record of my presence. A way of saying, I'm here. And that camera, well, it was still there. On. Silent witness to everything they thought no one would ever see. The days began to repeat themselves like faded copies of the same page. Nothing changed, only the weight growing in the air, like an invisible smoke that enveloped me on all sides. Douglas no longer made any effort to hide his contempt. It was as if, to him, I no longer had a name, nor a history. Just an uncomfortable presence, a piece of furniture out of place. Go to your room, old lady. The first time I heard that, the word hit me in the chest like a slap. Not because of my age, because aging has never been a shame. But because of the tone. Because of the intention. It was as if he were pushing me into a corner of existence, as if I no longer belonged in their world. I cringed. I went back to my room. I said nothing. My daughter was standing next to me. She heard. And remained silent. She didn't even look at me. She continued with her phone in her hand, scrolling as if nothing had happened. That hurt more than his words. Because her silence screamed. As the days passed, she gradually withdrew, almost strategically. She left her responsibilities to me, the grandchildren, the house, lunch, but she no longer spoke to me with affection. If she spoke, it was out of necessity. Mom, is dinner ready? Can you pick up the kids today? No, thank you. No, how are you? One day she commented to him, thinking I wasn't listening. She doesn't do anything all day. She just walks around the house. And he doesn't even pay rent, he replied, laughing. I was in the hallway. The floor disappeared from under my feet for a moment. The food on the stove was still boiling. It was my beans they were going to eat. My body, which cared for their children. My hands, which washed clothes, organized drawers, and sorted the younger boy's medicine. I started noticing things I'd previously pretended not to notice. The dishes that stopped coming complete. While everyone else was eating meat, rice and salad, mine came with nothing but rice and beans. The excuse was that there weren't any left. I smiled, saying I wasn't hungry. But inside, a mixture of humiliation and disbelief swallowed me silently. Doors started closing in my face. Literally. If I was in the hallway, someone would slam the bedroom door shut. If I entered the living room, my cell phone would be quickly turned away. It was as if my presence was disturbing. As if I were an out-of-place figure, a background noise in the perfect life they were trying to stage. I was losing my taste for things. Food was no longer tasty. The television was on, but I paid no attention. I sat on the bed in my room and stared at the ceiling. Sometimes I hugged the pillow my granddaughter gave me years ago, embroidered with the phrase, "You're the best grandma in the world." That was all that remained of tangible affection. I started talking less, treading more lightly, expecting less. That's how pain becomes routine, when you realize that if you speak, you'll get insulted. If you smile, they'll ignore you. If you cry, no one will notice. And yet, I continued caring for them. Why? Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of faith. Maybe because of that invisible thread that connects a mother to her children, even when all seems lost. Or maybe because, deep down, I still believed my daughter would wake up. That she would remember the woman who hurriedly changed her clothes at the hospital to be present at her birth. The woman who sold candy at the school gates to pay for the end-of-year field trip. But that rescue never came. And with each passing day, Douglas became more comfortable belittling me. He started saying in front of the children that I was old, slow, and annoying. Once, when he saw me lifting a heavy bag, he blurted out, "Be careful there, Grandma. If you break your pelvis, no one will pay for the hospital, huh?" He laughed. To himself. Priscilla didn't react. She just looked at me like someone looking at a leaf that had fallen from a tree. Inevitable, dispensable. The children also began to avoid me. Not out of malice, but because they learn by example. If their mother doesn't listen to their grandmother, if their father makes fun of them, if adults don't show respect, how can we expect the little ones to do the same? And this was perhaps the cruelest blow. Feeling that, little by little, even their grandchildren's love was slipping through their fingers. It was as if everything I had built was crumbling before my eyes. My legacy, my history, my role. I was a shadow of the woman I once was. And yet, the camera was still there. Hidden. Steady. Recording every gesture, every word, every hidden truth that they believed they had buried in their routine. The sentence came like a cold blade, delivered in such a matter-of-fact tone it sounded like barroom chatter. "This old woman's been going on too long." I was in the hallway, the clean tablecloth folded in my arms, heading toward the kitchen. The sound of his voice froze me. It wasn't just the content, it was the calmness with which he said it. Like someone talking about the weather, or an old piece of furniture blocking their path. Reflexively, I backed away slowly, stepping lightly so as not to make a sound. My heart was pounding in my chest, and for a second I thought he could hear it. I walked into the room and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, still with the towel on my lap, and stayed there, listening to the silence engulf me. My body trembled, but my eyes were dry. It's strange how sometimes shock paralyzes even tears. It didn't take long for all that tension to turn into something more. Something that came not as a storm, but as a small, cowardly gesture. It was 2 days later, on a sultry afternoon. I was walking downstairs with a basket of clean clothes in my arms. The television was blaring from the living room. The children were squealing happily outside. I was distracted, trying to remember if I'd turned off the iron. And then, I felt it. It was a quick touch. Not hard, but precise. A calculated bump. Enough to knock me off balance, but not enough to seem intentional. The kind of gesture that only those who have lived with contempt learn to recognize. My feet slipped, and everything went into slow motion. The basket flew. My shoulder hit first, then my hip, and finally my head. The pain came next. At first, there was only silence. A silence filled with shock. The world seemed to stop for a few seconds. I woke up in the hospital. A ringing in my ears, pain in every bone, and my daughter's indifferent gaze stood beside the gurney. She was fiddling with her cell phone. When she realized I'd opened my eyes, she simply said, "Thank goodness it wasn't anything serious. We think you tripped on the rug." She didn't even ask if I remembered what happened. She didn't even want to hear my version. She just concluded, like someone repeating a rehearsed script. The doctor said there were no fractures, just bruises. I was given pain medication, compresses, and told to avoid climbing stairs for a few days. And so it was. I trudged home, feeling like all I had left was to take up as little space as possible. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with my head throbbing, hugging an old pillow that smelled like my old room, the one I left behind when I sold my house. A room that no longer exists, just like the woman I was back then no longer exists. All that remained was this tired body, trying to find a place to exist without getting in the way. I opened the nightstand drawer and grabbed a small box containing some old photos. Vicente and I at the beach. Me with my young children. Me smiling, my skin firm, my eyes alive. Part of me wanted to tear up those photos, as if erasing the past would alleviate the present. But another part held on tight. Because there, in that image, was the memory of the woman who still lived inside me, even if hidden beneath layers of pain, fear and silence. For the next few days, no one mentioned the fall. It was as if nothing had happened. As if I'd simply slipped because I was old, careless, unnecessary. The whole time, I felt like they were waiting for me to forget about it too. To pretend it was truly an accident. But I couldn't. And then, on one of those quiet afternoons, my granddaughter came into my room. She closed the door carefully, took my hand in both of hers, and said softly, almost as if in a secret, "Grandma, check the garage camera." At that moment, my breath caught for a second. I stared at her. She bit her lip and repeated even more quietly. She recorded it. She knew. She had seen. And that camera. It could be the thread I had left. Perhaps there lay the only truth they had not yet managed to bury. I sat there motionless, my granddaughter's voice still echoing in my memory. "Grandma, look at the garage camera." The words were whispered, but with the power of a scream. The kind of truth that doesn't need to be explained, just felt. It felt as if someone, after a long time, had seen me. Not as a frail old woman, but as someone worthy of truth. Of justice. I waited for her to leave, my heart pounding. I didn't even know if the camera still worked properly. It had been a while since anyone had talked about it. But the simple fact that there was a chance was enough. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a spark inside me. Something like strength. A desire to get up, not just from bed, but from the invisible condition they'd forced upon me. I stood up slowly. My back ached. My hips still ached from the fall. But I walked to the garage like someone crossing a bridge between what they've suffered and what they need to discover. The equipment was there. Small, discreet, fixed in the corner of the ceiling. A tiny red light still blinked. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. It was as if I were about to open a door to something I'd always known but never had the courage to fully face. I carried the recorder to the bedroom with trembling hands. I turned it on, took another deep breath, and began searching. Days. Hours. Images passed slowly, as if time wanted to test me. Until I found it. That moment. That staircase. That bump. Helen's body falling with the clothes I remembered. The basket flying. And he, Douglas, with his arms still outstretched, his face expressionless. No fright, no guilt. Nothing. I paused the video. My hands were sweating. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen as if I were looking at myself in a mirror for the first time in a long time. That was it. The naked truth. And raw. I guarded the flash drive like a diamond. It represented more than a file. It was a divider. A revelation. The exact line between the woman who silently allowed everything, and the one who would no longer accept being reduced. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay with my eyes open, feeling what it was like to be alive again. The pain was still there. The bruised body. The scorn of others. The loneliness. But there was something new. A silent decision. I didn't yet know what I would do with it. But I knew I wouldn't ignore it. That the image held a power even they couldn't imagine. The next day, the atmosphere in the house was the same. Stuffy, dense, as if the air were always thick with unspoken words. My daughter walked past me and simply said, "There's bread on the table." I nodded. Douglas didn't appear in the kitchen. The television was loud in their bedroom. My grandchildren played in the backyard. Everything was the same on the outside. But inside, everything was different. I made coffee. I placed 3 cups on the table. 2 of them remained untouched, as always. But I needed to continue my actions. It was my way of resisting without making a fuss. Part of me wanted to go into the living room and show the video right away, in front of everyone. Press play and let the image speak for itself. But another part knew I needed to wait. Plan. That the truth, to have impact, needs to emerge at the right moment. In the days that followed, I began to observe more, listen more, and understand the behind-the-scenes of my own story. I had never realized how many layers existed in that house. The power play, the veiled control, the subtle manipulation. Words like mindset and transformation took on new meaning for me. Because I realized that, more than denouncing what they had done to me, I needed to reclaim who I was before it all erased me completely. I began to record. In an old notebook I found in a drawer, I began to write. Not just what happened, but what I felt, what I thought, what I left unsaid. Like a diary of truth. There I wrote about the impact of that fall. About the pain that came not just from my bones, but from my soul. And, most importantly, about the moment my granddaughter, with such a simple phrase, restored to me my sense of worth. "Look at the camera, Grandma." It wasn't just words. It was a summons. A silent call to not let everything end in silence. And in that notebook, between crooked lines and jumbled memories, I began to reconstruct the woman who once gave up everything for love, and who now needed to decide what to do with the revelation she held in her hands. The notebook became my hiding place and my shield. Writing it was like opening a window in a room that had been locked for years. The air rushed in heavily at first, then began to circulate. Each word poured out was a step out of the shadows. While the house continued with its silences and cold routines, I found in those pages a safe place to reconstruct my emotional memory. A space where my pain ceased to be invisible and took shape. I wrote down everything. The sidelong glances, the unspoken phrases, the details no one noticed. And it was precisely one detail that one day, as I walked to the garage, made me stop dead in my tracks. A blink. A little red light. I knew that blink. It was the camera. That same camera I'd asked to have installed when I still lived there with some sense of belonging. It had been after a robbery in the neighborhood. I remember it well, because it was the last investment I made in that house before selling mine. At the time, Douglas said it was overkill. That no one would get in there with an automatic gate and a street camera. But I insisted. He didn't argue, just did it reluctantly, as he always did when something wasn't his idea. The camera was discreetly installed in a corner of the garage where no one else paid attention. And, like everything invisible in that house, it stayed there. Forgotten. But now, she blinked. Alive. Connected. Present. My heart raced. What if she'd caught it? What if that angle showed exactly what I needed to prove? The fall. The movement of his body. The disguised brush. The disdain. Suddenly, what had been just a trauma became a documentable event. Evidence. Witness. That camera, ignored by everyone, was perhaps the only thing capable of removing me from the role of silent victim and placing me back as the protagonist of my own story. I returned to my room, trying to hide my anxiety. My palms were sweating. I felt a mixture of fear and hope. Because if it had registered, I wouldn't be alone anymore. And if it hadn't, I would have to continue living with a doubt that ate at me. That night, while everyone slept, I walked to the garage in silence. The sound of my breathing was the only noise. I opened the panel, plugged in the backup device, and waited. Time seemed to stand still. My entire body was alert. I knew that from that moment on, any image could change everything. And then I saw it. First, a figure. Then, clearly, it was me, coming down with the laundry basket. Douglas following close behind. The quick gesture. The movement of his arm. The fall. The sharp impact on the ground. And his reaction, or lack thereof. He simply turned away. He walked away. He didn't even duck. He didn't even call for help. I paused there. I didn't need anything else. The image spoke for itself. From that moment on, it was no longer just a suspicion. It was a fact. A recorded act. A moment that no one could distort, deny, or cover up. It was the behind-the-scenes footage of everything I'd experienced, now laid bare in a priceless, just a few seconds long video. I sat in the kitchen chair, the file carefully saved inside the flash drive. The silence of the early morning enveloped me, but it was a different kind of silence. For the first time in a long time, it didn't suffocate me. It was the silence of something about to be revealed. I returned to the room with light steps, but my mind racing. The truth was there, in my hands. And along with it came a burning question. What would I do with this? The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I opened the window and let the cool air touch my face. For the first time in months, I felt the taste of freedom approaching, even if it was still distant. I didn't speak to anyone that day. I just observed. I jotted down a few more things in my notebook. I mentally organized my options. This wasn't just a recording. It was a decision waiting to be made. There, amidst the doubts and fear, there was also a growing strength. The strength of the hidden truth that finally had light. The knowledge that, even hurt, I was still capable of turning things around. Of making an impact. Of transforming an injustice into a milestone. And it was in that state of emotional wakefulness, between the painful past and the future that awaited me, that a new part of my journey began to take shape, with more clarity than I could have imagined. The video wasn't even 30 seconds long. But every second carried the weight of months, maybe years, of swallowed silences, of averted glances, of doors slammed in my face. There was no narration, no soundtrack. Just the raw image and the definitive proof. The exact moment my dignity was thrown down the stairs. And no one could pretend they didn't see it anymore. I spent days with that hidden flash drive. I thought about showing it to my daughter. I thought about confronting Douglas in front of everyone. But it wasn't time. I still needed to understand what that meant to me. And more than that, I needed someone who wouldn't treat me like the exaggerated old lady in the house. I needed an outside perspective. Someone with clarity, with distance. And that's when I thought of Donna Irene, my next-door neighbor, an old friend, the kind you trust because you've been through so much together. She was the kind of woman who, even with the years weighing on her bones, still carried a firmness in her voice. I went to her house with the flash drive in my bag and a cup of cornmeal cake as an apology. When she saw me, she smiled in surprise and said, "You disappeared, Helen." I smiled back, but with that smile that doesn't reach my eyes. She understood immediately. We walked in and sat at the kitchen table. The smell of freshly brewed coffee gave me a strange sense of homesickness. I took the flash drive out of my bag, placed it on the table, and said, "I need you to look at something. And then, if you think it makes sense, point me in the direction of someone who can help me." She logged into her laptop with steady hands and attentive eyes. When the video started, she didn't blink. She watched in silence, from beginning to end. When it ended, she paused, slowly closed the computer lid, looked at me for a few seconds, and said, "This is a crime, Helen. This is serious. And you won't go through this alone again." The next day, she took me to an acquaintance of hers, a retired lawyer who now provided free legal advice to seniors. His name was Jonas. He was soft-spoken, but with a look of someone who'd seen it all. I showed him the video. He didn't react with shock or pity. He simply said, "This file is worth its weight in gold. And you have more strength than you realize." That resonated with me. Because for so long, I'd felt disposable, irrelevant, voiceless. And here was a stranger, a lawman, telling me I had power. That this moment of pain was, in fact, a legitimate weapon. A chance to transform not only my situation, but the perception of so many others who silently endure the same kind of violence. He suggested I file a police report. I hesitated. Fear still lingered. Not of Douglas, but of my daughter's reaction. Of the emotional toll of confronting her with the truth. But after everything I'd been through, I knew I couldn't let that fear decide for me anymore. Before anything legal, Jonas recommended I share the video in a safe group that supported women and elderly people experiencing domestic abuse. He said stories like mine had the power to raise awareness, inspire, and, above all, break cycles. I accepted. I wrote a short, simple, and straightforward text. I only told the essentials, that I was a grandmother who had been humiliated and discredited, and now had something to show. The video was posted there, in that space I hadn't even known existed until then. What happened in the next few hours left me in shock. The video began to circulate. First in the group. Then in others. Then on social media. No captions. No filters. No manipulation. Just the image. Raw. Real. Shocking. People began commenting, sharing, tagging friends. It was as if someone had opened the dam of outrage. I received messages from strangers saying, "My mother went through this. My grandmother never had the courage to speak out. Thank you for showing what so many hide." Some people cried in the comments. Others cried for justice. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. My daughter discovered the video on the second day. She came into my room furious, phone in hand, eyes red, voice trembling. "You're exposing our family. This is emotional manipulation, Mom. Are you trying to play the victim?" I sat there, looking at her with the serenity of someone who carries the truth in their pocket. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain. She knew. Deep down, she knew. She saw the video. She heard the words. She realized that her silence now was also visible to everyone. And it was at that moment that I realized I was no longer the burden they pushed around the house. I was the woman who had finally been heard. The woman who broke the narrative. Who revealed what no one had the courage to say. From then on, nothing would be the same. After that day, I stopped asking permission to exist. It wasn't immediate, of course. The transformation didn't come with fireworks or empowered speeches. It was an intimate, almost invisible process, like the change of seasons that we only notice when the scent of the air changes and the leaves slowly begin to fall. But I felt it. Inside me, something had awakened. Something that would no longer accept being silenced. That same week, I packed my few things and moved in with my cousin, Clarice. She's always been the kind of woman who doesn't mince words, but truly welcomes. As soon as I walked into her house, I heard her say, "Now you're breathing again." And that was it. Breathing again. Smelling the coffee again without fear of judgment. Taking up space again without feeling like I'm apologizing for being alive. Clarice offered me a room with a huge window. The light streamed in the morning and illuminated everything. It was almost symbolic. I would spend hours sitting there, writing, remembering, crying when I needed to, and smiling too, because little by little, the laughter began to return. At first shyly, then more confidently. One day, while organizing one of my old boxes, I found a recipe book I'd put together decades ago. In it, besides the recipes, were notes on raising children, caring for plants, and reflections I'd jotted down after conversations with Vicente. It was like a diary of my silent wisdom. Things no one ever valued, but they were there, recorded with care. Clarice read a few excerpts and said, "You should share this with the world." I laughed. I thought she was joking. But she was serious. People need to hear what you have to say, Helen. There are so many people feeling alone, lost, and needing a voice like yours. At first, I hesitated. I was embarrassed. I was afraid of judgment. I thought no one would want to listen to a 72-year-old woman talk about life, loss, intuition, forgiveness. But then I thought, why not? After everything I'd been through, I knew I no longer needed anyone's approval to exist. That's how I started. I borrowed Clarice's phone and recorded a short video, sitting on the porch, talking about a simple piece of advice my father gave me when I was a girl. Those who swallow too much crying will eventually drown inside. It was a short phrase, but full of truth. I recorded it from the heart. No script. No makeup. Just me, my story, and the desire not to let this wisdom die with me. Clarice posted to me in a group. The next day, more than 50 people had commented. Some shared stories. Others said they cried. One woman wrote, "I remembered my mother watching you. It's like she came back to give me advice." That hit me hard. I kept recording. 1 video a week. Then 2. I started talking about difficult decisions, about secrets that make us sick, about true gratitude. Not the kind we pretend to feel to keep the peace, but the real kind, the kind that comes when we're truly seen. People started writing me letters. Real ones. Letters with shaky handwriting, full of stories. Women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, telling me things they'd never told anyone. Men too. Repentant sons. Granddaughters who wanted to understand their grandmothers better. It was as if the camera that had once captured my push was now turned on me again, but this time, with purpose. My voice began to spread. My story became an example. I, who had been called a burden, became a reference. And with each video, each comment, I felt like I was rewriting the end of my story with dignity. It wasn't revenge. It was rebirth. I started going out more. I joined a reading group in the square. I made friends with other women who had also been silenced. We met to talk, drink tea, and exchange stories. One of them, Marlene, told me something I've never forgotten. "Your courage saved me from giving up." And that's when I understood. The transformation I'd been seeking so desperately wasn't about changing what they'd done to me, but about what I decided to do with what was left. It was about mindset. About choices. About not accepting that pain is the final word. Even with all the scars, I became whole again. And this time, in my own way. I didn't seek revenge. It was never about that. I just wanted to be heard, to be seen, to be recognized as someone who still mattered. But life, yes, has a way of adjusting what seems out of alignment. And it began doing so when I least expected it, in the silence of others' reactions, in the invisible force of what was exposed. After the video went viral, everything changed, not just for me, but for them too. Douglas was the first to feel the real impact of what he tried to cover up. He worked at a company that always claimed to be committed to human values, social campaigns, and respect for the elderly. A huge irony. Someone on the team saw the video and passed it on to HR. In less than 72 hours, he was called into a meeting and left without a badge. The news spread like wildfire. His co-workers distanced themselves. His social media was flooded with outraged comments, phrases like "abuser disguised as the perfect son-in-law, how do you sleep at night after that?" And no matter how much he tried to deny it, to counter it, to say it was a misunderstanding, the images were there. Cold, direct, indisputable. My daughter, Priscilla, tried to defend herself at first. She said it was a setup, that the video was taken out of context, that everything was being exaggerated. But it didn't last. Her friends disappeared. The invitations dried up. Even the school's mothers group turned against her. They started asking, "How could you allow this in your home? How could you let your mother be treated like this for so long?" Some stopped greeting her at the gate. Others switched sides. She became withdrawn. She fell silent. She lost the sparkle in her eyes, the same look that had once ignored me so many times. And though part of me still hurt to see her like this, another part knew this wasn't punishment. It was consequence. It was the silent return of the decisions she chose to make, or the ones she chose to ignore. The neighborhood's behavior also changed. Before, it was common to see Douglas in front of the house, tinkering with his car, greeting his neighbors as if he had everything under control. Now, the gate was closed. The windows were always with curtains drawn. The entire street began to move differently around them. Those who had previously treated me as the nice old lady, who disappeared, now whispered with regret or shame. The impact was greater than I could have imagined. Not out of vanity, but because of the emotional dimension of it all. It was as if a hidden story, which could have been just another one among many hushed up, had finally broken the veil. What had been swept under the rug came back like dust no one could ignore. And somehow, that also resonated with my own perception. I began to understand that what had happened to me wasn't just personal. It was collective. It was about all the women who were silenced. About mothers who were called excessive. About grandmothers who became burdens. It was about structure, mindset, about the urgency to rethink how the world treats those who have given their all and only wanted the basics. Respect. I received letters from women saying they left abusive homes after seeing my video. Others, who reconnected with their mothers, asked for forgiveness. I saw entire families reunited through my pain transformed into courage. And this gave me a sense of purpose I never imagined I'd have after 70. His fall didn't bring me joy. But it did bring me justice. A kind of justice that isn't measured in courts, but in collective conscience. That video, born from the cruelty of a push and the coldness of an omission, became an emotional document. A revelation. A key to changing the way many people view what it means to grow old. I continued with my new routine, simple but full of meaning. I continued recording videos, answering letters, visiting the reading group. I felt like I was experiencing a second youth, not in body, but in soul. And this new phase was mine. Conquered. Chosen. But despite everything, a part of me still carried a barely healed wound. Because even though the world had acknowledged the truth, something was still missing. A final adjustment. A pending conversation. Something that, deep down, I knew needed to happen. Even if it hurt. And then, Clarice knocked on my door that morning, her expression one of someone seeking peace, or at least an answer. I saw her coming from afar, carrying that bag of documents and a strange, different serenity. Inside her, I knew, was the expectation of seeing something change. Not just in me but in all of us. When she entered, Douglas was there, leaning against the hallway wall, his gaze lowered, unwilling to meet mine. Priscilla shrank beside me. The silence fell hard, heavy as a closed door. Clarice calm said, "Helen, can we talk?" I stood up, sat firmly, and took a deep breath. Her voice was soft, but firm as steel. "I saw the video," Priscilla began, her voice trembling. "And I'm so sorry." The sound of those words pierced me. I wanted to shrug my shoulders, look at him. To hear from his lips what he hadn't even had the courage to admit in silence. Douglas said nothing. He just stood there, staring at the ground. When Priscilla spoke, he lifted his head slightly. His shoulders slumped. His face was lined. "You pushed me," I said firmly, "but it was God who lifted me up." The sentence came out lightly, but laden with years of pain, abandonment, and invisibility. It was as if, with it, I had finally gathered together the pieces of myself that had been scattered. Clarice cleared her throat, looking at me with newfound respect. I was wrong, Mother," Priscilla said softly. "I was a coward. By remaining silent, by allowing contempt to become normal." Clarice looked at me tenderly and said that support, visibility, and turning this pain into something useful could be a powerful decision. Douglas, still crestfallen, murmured, "I never wanted to." But the sentence lingered. Because wanting isn't always enough. It doesn't always bring us closer. The windows of the house seemed to reopen. Words that had previously been invisible began to carry weight. "Thank you," Clarice asked, turning to Priscilla. "You could have spoken a long time ago." The atmosphere seemed to spin. The decisions were no longer mine alone to bear. They were before them. The impact of the hidden, homegrown truth began to reverberate. A neighbor who had previously avoided the porch, a friend who had crooked a smile, all those who had watched from afar, now whispered, "How could anyone have allowed this to get this far?" And the truth. The truth now demanded that the broken trust be acknowledged. Because forgiveness does exist. But trust. I lost that. We were silent for a moment. I looked at them, Clara holding my hand. I felt my chest ache in a different way, this time with relief, not fear. With a quiet, internal power that grows when you decide to no longer accept your story being erased or distorted. That turning point marked me. Not because revenge appeals to me, but because justice isn't about humiliation, it's about restored dignity. Real transformation. That moment of confrontation was the point at which my life was no longer controlled by the shadows they cast over me. And in that moment, I realized that my spiritual and emotional journey, my new purpose, my decisions from then on, needed a courage that I had almost forgotten existed. Clarice left after a few more words. Priscilla stayed, looking into my eyes. Douglas, once again, looked at the ground. I took a deep breath. What I saw wasn't just regret, it was possibility. The possibility of rebuilding, of being heard, of re-establishing boundaries. The sun streamed in through the living room window, filtered through the curtains. The light seemed to signal that something had changed. That my story would no longer be written in the dark. And it was there, in that morning-lit room, that I made a decision that many told me was madness. But madness, sometimes, is simply refusing to live in the imposed silence. I sat on that porch as if it were an altar. Not the kind of altar made of marble or flowers, but the sacred kind built with silence, courage, and truth spoken at the right time. It was late afternoon, the sky painted orange, and the wind played with my white hair, which I now wore loose, not out of vanity, but out of freedom. Behind the camera, Clarice adjusted the frame. And I, for the first time, didn't read a script. I simply spoke from the heart. What's done in the dark always comes to light. Those words weren't just a rant. They were a reminder. A firm whisper to whoever was listening on the other side of the screen. Because the world needs to remember that there's no darkness that lasts forever when the truth decides to come out. In that house where I was once treated like a burden, where my name was silenced and my face avoided, there are echoes today. Echoes of conscience. I don't know if Douglas truly understood what he did, or if he simply fears what the world now knows about him. But this is no longer about him. Nor about my daughter. It's about me. About what was left of me after the fall. About what I built from the shrapnel. I moved on, but not without looking back with the dignity of one who survived. Not with resentment. I chose to leave that behind. But with memory. With the strength of one who refuses to erase what was experienced, just because it's painful. Pain is also part of the journey. It teaches. It cleanses. It reveals. And there, on that balcony, after everything that had happened, I understood something that had previously been just theory. Reconciliation isn't about forgetting. It's about deciding not to carry what destroys you. It's about looking into the eyes of the one who hurt you and saying, I got back up. With or without you. And that decision has a price, but also a gift. The gift of peace. I still receive messages today from women who say my story woke them up. That they left homes where they weren't heard. That they reunited with mothers, sisters, aunts. That they opened the box of family secrets and finally breathed. This, to me, is divine justice. Not the justice of the courts, but the justice that comes when the truth heals more than it hurts. Priscilla. She tries. Sometimes she writes to me. She says she misses me, that she dreams of me. She responds to my videos with sad emojis. I read everything. And maybe, in time, we'll we'll find each other again in a safe place, where love doesn't require blindness and forgiveness doesn't demand silence. For now, I maintain the distance that restored my health. But I don't close the doors. Because doors can also open slowly. And Douglas, well, life is dealing with him. Life, when it decides to teach, is creative. And that's why I learned not to wish evil, only the truth. Because that, in itself, does what needs to be done. Looking back now, I realize that all that pain pushed me exactly where I needed to be. Here, talking to you. Using my voice, my story, my experience to illuminate other journeys. Because when you're forcibly ripped from a place, you have two choices: live in fear, or be reborn in another space with greater strength. I chose the second option. And if there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's this: never underestimate a wounded soul, with evidence in hand. And it was like that, through tears and struggle, that I understood that the light doesn't arrive asking permission. It invades. It exposes. It heals. And it transforms. And when it arrives, there's no turning back. If you've stuck with me this far, I can only thank you for sharing this time with me. It's rare to find someone who listens with their heart, and if this story found space there, then it was worth every word. If this video touched you in any way, if you felt that this journey also carries a piece of your own, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. There's so much I still want to share with you. Stories that heal, that awaken, that welcome. And tell me in the comments, with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end." That way I'll know who walked with me this far. It's important for me to know that on the other side there's someone who feels it with me. Oh, and leave a like, not just for the video, but for everything we experienced in this little conversation. This exchange makes all the difference. There's a video here that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. Because this journey of reconstruction still has many chapters.